Hi there, it's Stuart once again, and if you're new to the channel, please make sure you hit the subscribe button so you'll be notified for subsequent videos. One of the things about neuro-linguistic programming that I'm totally fond of is the idea that we can shift the things inside our head in order to create the reality that we want. Now, I know that sounds like some mystical thing, but the truth behind it is that all of our experiences are primarily subjective. If you truly want to be able to create the reality that you want, you got to take charge of the subjective reality first, right? So let's talk a little bit about the overwhelm, the stress, and this idea that time is not within your control. A lot of people experience the problems of overwhelm and not having enough time and so on. And I understand that it is actually a reality. The problem is that we all have 24 hours in a day, so it can't possibly be that Warren Buffett isn't overwhelmed, that some large corporate CEO isn't overwhelmed, but we are. So how does that factor in? We are creatures of extrapolation. In other words, I can take meanings inside my head and I can create a sensation as if time is going much more slowly. But the reality and the outcome of that is that my body goes into a different state and is able to perform as if I have all the time in the world or as if I have no time at all. Now, let's just put it this way. If I were to get you to think of a very crowded day in your calendar, or you've got a really long to-do list. Now, some people are activated by a to-do list to get motivated to cross things out. Other people get completely overwhelmed because they're seeing all of them bunched up together. So when you think about neuro-linguistic programming from the standpoint of mental structures in your head, it must mean that there are certain aspects of the way by which you're perceiving reality either causing time to speed up or slow down inside your head. Haven't you noticed that when you're queuing up and you're really in a rush to get to a next location, 5 minutes seems to be a really long time? But if you're able to pack in 2 or 3 different things concurrently while you're doing a 5-minute activity, it seems to go by very, very quickly. And one of the reasons is that you've not learned to do time calibration. In NLP, one of the things we talk about is calibration, and that skill is the ability for you to make distinctions through contrastive analysis. For example, when you are boiling a pot of water, how long does it take? Inside your head, you might think that it takes 10 minutes, but in reality, maybe it only takes 2, and again, depending on the nature of the temperature. And if you've calibrated to that, basically you can put that pot of water to heat to a boiling point and do something else that fits in within that concurrent activity within that span of time without very much fuss. For most of us, inside our heads, we tend to have time distortion for things we don't like. For instance, you take a look at your stack of income tax return forms and you feel not really liking it, right? So what do? You go inside your head and then you take those things, bring them closer to you, and then you overwhelm yourself through what is known as NLP submodalities. It does seem that your perception alters the face of what you deem to be overwhelming or not. Well, let's set the record straight. There are people who indeed do feel overwhelmed. But when you are overwhelmed, it means that there are multiple layers of things happening within a very constrained period of time. The truth is, unless you're like a army veteran going out and you're being pinned down by enemy forces, where literally multiple things that are vying for survival attention are hitting you all at the same time, it's very unlikely that we experience that, right? You're not really under fire. You may have multiple projects that are hitting you at the same time, but that's not really the same. On top of that, I've noted that there are some people who stay in the moment and they expand time whenever they're enjoying something so that 30-minute time frame actually feels like it's lasting forever, which is a great way of utilizing your time. So even though you're enjoying a 30-minute piece, don't think of it as if it's such a short span of time. Instead, you need to think about it as if it's an enjoyable long span of time so that your body and your psychology and your emotions actually get into that entire groove of feeling as if it was like a 2 or 3 hour thing. Now, this is very useful. When it comes to sleep, you can actually trick your brain into thinking that a 4-hour time spent is actually 8 hours. And while that may not physiologically be true, it actually allows your body to tap into a sort of placebo effect. Now, of course, I'm not advocating it that you do this every day, but what I do suggest is that your body and your mind work in tandem, if you're able to reap the benefits of this even for a short period of time, isn't it going to make your life less burdensome? I do have experiences of overwhelm myself, so doing this video should be a chore. Editing it is even worse, let alone doing the captions for it. However, I've come to recognize that there are certain things that I could do that can literally change the experience that I have. The experiences that I have and the interpretations I have in my brain are nothing more than signals that I can create associations with. Let's talk a little bit about brainwaves. In understanding how your brainwaves function, when you're in beta, this is where your brainwaves are kind of like rapid, and you find that the ability for you to concentrate is literally focus on just one thing. And you'll find that time passes by very differently when you're in beta compared with when you're in theta. So in theta, this is the time where you're feeling a little bit drowsy, you're dozing off, and you'll find something interesting. When you're in theta, typically time passes by a little bit faster than you actually think, right? So if you are dozing off, remember the moment where you doze off for that split second and you kind of like jolted yourself back up, and you might have felt that a significant amount of time had passed by, but in reality it was just a second. Right? So this is what happens when you're in different brain wave states. What we want to do is to be able to recognize how these states actually affect the passage of time. So hasn't there been a time where you also rushed to a meeting because you thought you were late, only to realize that you had seen the wrong date on the calendar? And actually the meeting was next week. During that period of time where you felt like, oh no, I'm late, you rushed and you're in a beta state rather than a theta state. So one of the key things about learning neuro-linguistic programming is the power of time distortion. Most of the time, it is a hypnotic state. And the more you can go into that hypnotic state, the more you can anchor that to relive or to revisit that experience all over again. So I may not enjoy a run, but I do know from experience and from talking to people who do long distance running that whenever they put themselves into a particular state, time seems to go by very quickly. Now, you might think it's crazy to run 2 hours or 3 hours, but the truth of the matter is that time is very relative. For some people who really enjoy it and go into the flow, that 2 or 3 hours actually goes by in the blink of an eye. Let's say you enjoy taking a shower and you spend 2 hours doing it. Okay, and if that happens, then wouldn't it be interesting to have the experience of enjoying a 2-hour shower within a 30-minute time frame? Now, I know some people are going to go like, but what kind of fun is that? Well, hang on. What if the experience is as intense and as enjoyable as a 2-hour shower, but you only needed to take 30 minutes for it? Wouldn't that be a productivity hack straight away? So if, let's say, I could get you to feel so overwhelmingly in awe, because you are spending a meditative state, going through gratitude and so on, and you elevate yourself to this state of awe, which, by the way, is an altered state of consciousness. Some people call that a higher gamma state. If you're able to get into that state, wouldn't it be interesting that you find a way to get to that state and within the span of 5 minutes, experience it as if you were there for an entire hour, right? And this is going to completely change the way you view time, because if I control time inside my head, not actually the objective world view of time, but rather the experience of doing something within a time span, wouldn't that make a big difference? In other words, I could actually enjoy sleeping for just 3 hours a night, experiencing it as if it were a 9-hour stretch. Some people call it the placebo effect, but I believe that we can activate it, especially if you've got hypnosis as one of your trump cards underneath your sleeve. This is, of course, speaking to those of you who already understand a little bit about hypnosis, if you're a hypnosis practitioner or if you're an NLP practitioner. If you're not, click on the link down below, have a conversation with me, and let's figure out how you can actually learn this stuff. I'll give you the lowdown on all of the things that are necessary for you to create a powerful practice utilizing NLP. So one of the tricks, therefore, is to understand the 4 components I've talked about. Number 1, submodalities. In NLP, we talk about the process of comparing different pictures. As an NLP practitioner, what you can do is to be able to take those 2 pictures and compare and contrast enjoyable but time went by too quickly, not enjoyable but time passed by really painfully slowly. Once I'm able to contrast these two different experiences, I know the submodalities that made time go slowly, and I also know a situation where time went by quickly. And what's interesting now is that whenever I encounter a painfully slow experience that I want to speed up, I'll just splice the submodalities of a different situation into that experience. And if I wanted the situation to kind of like extend and slow down, then I will apply those submodalities into the other picture. Of course, it takes a little bit more of just this basic explanation to get you to really understand it, because at the end of the day, it's also knowing what kinds of states enable both scenario to feel that time is completely immersive or completely going fast the way I want it to. So this is the time where you find out a little bit more about how to apply NLP through my NLP Apprentice program. Click on the link down below to find out more. Second piece, as I mentioned, is hypnosis. To be able to get into the right kinds of states is a process of hypnosis, regardless of whether you're trained or not. And most of the time, you're putting yourself into the wrong state in the wrong situation anyway. So what you want to do is be able to put yourself into that flow state on a regular basis by practicing going into that state easily and effectively, so that as time goes by, it doesn't feel like time has gone by for something that is a very pleasurable experience. But for something that's not very pleasurable, you could actually make it feel shorter than it actually is, so that it feels like you go in and you come out very, very quickly. That is one of the key things that top performers in sports, in marksmanship, that's exactly what they do. So what's interesting is that these top performers know how to dilate the passage of time. It's almost as if they went inside their head, and if time were like a rubber band, they stretched it out. That reminds me of the third thing, which is known as timelines. Inside your head, what you could do is take what your impression is of that timeline and stretch it out so that, relatively speaking, the positions don't change. You know that Thursday is here and Friday is here, but if you brought it too close, you might be having discomfort. So what you could do is then, in your mind, just stretch it out a little bit so that you have a little bit more comfort. So you'll find that timelines are a very useful tool. Not only will you be able to use a timeline to immerse yourself in here and now experiences, but you can also use it to become a more efficient and effective planner by being an observer of all the things or the events that you need to deal with in your life. So I've alluded to this final piece, number 4, which is anchoring. Anchoring is nothing more than a way of creating associations. And while you get into a hypnotic state, you want to be able to fire off anchors so that you can revisit that again. I've mentioned this earlier on in this video. However, you want to do this very deliberately so that the states are associated with your submodalities, so that when you revisit those submodalities, the same feelings actually come out. Now, the only way I know how to do this is through your 3 main modalities, your visual, auditory, and kinesthetic modalities. So for visual, I might put up a poster that represents something. Every time I look at it, it brings me into that resourceful state that I need. Or a piece of music or a certain sound, like the snapping of the fingers, could actually help me to get into a state better. And finally, kinesthetically, I could actually create an anchor where I could literally create an anchor just by doing this, for example, or touching myself on the shoulder in a unique way so that other people couldn't interfere with that anchor, and use that as a reminder to set off in motion the kind of state I need to revisit, so that when I need to, and I'm in the midst of doing my work, I just need to fire off that anchor, and all of a sudden, I flow into that state very naturally. Now, all of these components take time to practice, and they take a lot of dedication in order to create the value that you want. And sometimes you'll make a few mistakes in order for you to get to where you really truly need to go, right? So what I recommend for you to do is this. Just click on the link below. If you're not yet an NLP practitioner, or you've become so rusty that you need to get a refresher, go click on that. Let's have a discussion. Let's see how we can turn your productivity up a few notches. And if you're already a practitioner, I really appreciate you having watched this video. All I'd like you to do is to utilize this video to create more impact in your life. So if you feel that this was worth watching and you think that there's something that you've learned from it, type inside the comments down below, and then I'll see you in the next video.